Hello everyone, I'm Gert-Jan. I'm a PhD student at Distrinet at the University of Leuven, and today I'm going to present our paper Reading Between the Lines, an extensive evaluation of the security and privacy implications of Epub reading systems. But before we get too technical, let me first give you some context. Nowadays, almost any book is not only published in a physical format, but also in a digital format, so-called ebooks. And since their introduction, ebooks have grown into a multi-billion-dollar market. This, in turn, gave rise to a lot of ebook formats, each one defining their own architecture. Now, most of these formats are proprietary, for example, owned by a publishing company. Luckily, in an attempt to promote consensus, an open ebook format was introduced, as what is now known as the Epub technical standard. Since then, Epub has become very popular, as now it is one of the most widely supported ebook formats across devices. Now let's have a look at the specification. Here I'd like to focus on two main parts, being the architecture of Epub files and the way applications are supposed to render Epubs. These applications are called Epub reading systems. The specification describes an Epub as a zip archive with an internal predefined structure. This zip archive contains all the necessary information to represent the ebook, most importantly, the actual text and imagery included by the author. But how is this content represented? Well, Epubs primarily consist of XHTML documents, CSS style sheets, and possibly even JavaScript code, making Epubs bear close resemblance to actual websites. As for Epub reading systems, these will render Epubs according to the specification. And why reinvent the wheel here? For this, Epub reading systems rely on web engines, the same components that are used by web browsers. And like browsers grant certain capabilities to loaded web pages, Epub reading systems grant certain capabilities to loaded Epubs. This brings us to our research questions. The first question is, what is the state of freely available Epub reading systems? On one hand, in terms of capabilities granted to the loaded Epubs, and on the other hand, in the context of upheld security considerations. Or, simply put, what is an Epub allowed to do on the user's device? This ecosystem has never been subjected to a thorough evaluation, and according to us, this is paramount for providing the user with more transparency. Also, taking into account the rather lenient security considerations described in the Epub specification. For the second question, we focus on the Epubs that are being distributed online. Are the identified capabilities already being abused in the wild? Here we consider two threat models. Can we find malicious Epubs that abuse capabilities to harm? For example, an attacker who tries to hack the user's device. And can we find Epubs that abuse capabilities to track? For example, a publisher would like to know more about the user's reading interests. To answer the first question, we collected 92 of the most popular free reading systems across 7 different platforms, and additionally 5 physical e-readers. As a side note, Amazon reading systems do not support Epubs, but here we used a conversion tool to convert the Epubs to a compatible format. When you are to evaluate such a large collection of applications, you better automate it, right? So this is what we did as much as possible, however crippled by the large variety of different user interfaces. To this end, we developed a semi-automated testbed which performs a black box evaluation as shown on the diagram. All crafted Epubs are embedded with experiments that probe for certain attack primitives. When loaded, these experiments would execute and instruct the Epub reading system to display the result, or, if allowed by the reading system, send the result to our local web server. The outcome is then stored for later analysis. In total, we performed 8 different experiments. I'll give a general overview of those experiments, but for more details I refer to our paper. First, we checked whether embedded JavaScript is executed, a rather straightforward experiment. Then we inferred whether the Epub is allowed to communicate with remote servers, for which we used a comprehensive collection of mechanisms. We also checked whether the reading system requires user consent, which is recommended by the specification. The remainder of experiments required JavaScript and were only performed for reading systems which execute embedded JavaScript. In the third experiment, we investigated whether the Epub is granted reading access to the local file system. More specifically, can it infer whether a certain file is present on the file system, for example through timing attacks? And can it actually read the contents of this file? We also evaluated whether the Epub can store data, leveraging inherited web engine functionalities like cookies or the local storage API, and whether this data persists between reading sessions. This could be used for tracking purposes. As you already might know, nowadays web pages can request the user for access to features like the device's microphone, webcam, or even location. In this experiment, we checked whether this functionality was inherited from the embedded web engine. If the reading system supports URI handles, this can be abused, for example, to initiate a phone call, send an email, or download a file. Here we try to open applications leveraging various handles. For each reading system, we identified the embedded web engine, leveraging a web engine fingerprinting technique. This way we checked whether the web engine was outdated and vulnerable. And lastly, for smartphones, we also checked whether the scripts embedded in the Epub were able to keep running even after the user switched focus to another app. This could increase the time window for a potential attack. Okay, let's move on to the actual results. Again, I'll give a general overview of the most interesting results. For more details, I refer to our paper. As displayed here in this table, almost half of the evaluated reading systems execute embedded JavaScript. This number is the smallest for browser extensions and e-readers. With the former, in 7 cases, inline scripts were blocked by an active content security policy. With the latter, we suspect the engine is configured not to execute any embedded JavaScript. Also, about half of the reading systems allowed remote communication, of which only one required user consent. This means that almost half of the reading systems are not compliant with the Epub specification security considerations. Again, the next experiments were only performed for reading systems which allow JavaScript execution. In 16 of those reading systems, a loaded Epub could infer the existence of a certain file on the local file system. And in 8 of those reading systems, it could also read and thus leak the contents of this file. Interesting here is that none of the iOS applications was susceptible to this vulnerability due to iOS's strict permission model. Here, none of the applications requested access to the file system as a whole. Only permission was requested for the actual Epub file to be opened. Furthermore, for the browser extensions, the enforced same origin policy prevented access to local files. And also interesting, 21 reading systems provide the means for persistent storage between reading sessions, which can be leveraged to enable tracking. Although the results of our semi-automated analysis provide a comprehensive picture of the state of free Epub reading systems, we argue that the exposed issues only pose as a lower bound. Our framework considers each reading system as a black box, essentially pushing the same buttons on each try. Most attackers are much more inventive than this. They examine the application for weaknesses in order to exploit them. To demonstrate that this strategy would expose more issues, we performed a case study on the most popular reading systems on 3 different platforms by manual analysis. On desktop, this is Apple Books, which comes pre-installed on macOS. Here we discovered that a symbolic link could be abused to leak user information or to launch a persistent denial of service attack against the application. The second case study involves the Epub Reader extension for both Chrome and Firefox. This extension requires the all URLs permission, which allows the extension to read responses from any website. By circumventing the content security policy, we were able to execute our embedded scripts, which led to a universal cross-site scripting attack. And lastly, by reverse engineering the Amazon Kindle, the most popular e-reader, we exposed an input validation issue which enabled otherwise disabled JavaScript execution. Because the embedded web engine is an outdated WebKit version with publicly disclosed vulnerabilities, we could exploit one of those to leak the entire library of the user. Now that we have a general idea of the state of Epub reading systems, let's have a look at Epubs in the wild, our second research question. Users generally obtain ebooks in two distinct ways, either through legal channels, such as online bookstores, or through illegal channels, such as file sharing platforms. To evaluate the latter ecosystem, we downloaded a total of 9,000 Epubs from the Pirate Bay and 4Shared. To check whether any of them were malicious, we parsed the contents for suspicious elements such as scripts or references to local files. This way we discovered that less than 1% actually embedded scripts, of which all were benign. No abuse was detected whatsoever. As for legal channels, we downloaded several free ebooks from 5 popular ebook stores. Again, after manual analysis, we did not find any indications for tracking nor malicious intent. However, to find out whether it would be feasible to publish a malicious ebook through official ebook vendors, we also assessed the self-publishing ecosystem. Most vendors nowadays provide a self-publishing service which can be used by smaller writers to publish digital books without the interposition of a publisher. Since the manuscript is provided by an interested party, being the writer, it would be good practice to sanitize before publication. We evaluated this sanitization process by submitting our own manuscript to the 6 most popular and free self-publishing services. We checked whether any of our included primitives were removed from the published version. This way we found that out of 6 self-publishing services, 4 do not sufficiently sanitize submitted manuscripts before publication and can be abused to effectively distribute malicious ebooks. This accounts for 94% of the market share of sold ebooks. Okay, we've come to the end of my presentation, but allow me to recap in a few takeaways. First, our evaluation demonstrates that almost none of the JavaScript supporting reading systems adhere to the security considerations. We exposed various flaws, such as, for example, file system isolation issues, in 16 reading systems. In total, we contacted the developers of 37 reading systems as part of our responsible disclosure. We're very pleased that as a result, the reported issues have been fixed in various widely used reading systems, such as Apple Books and the Amazon Kindle. As a more long-term solution, we propose to revise the Epub specification. Foremost, we urge to make the security considerations more strict. For example, the enforcement of the same origin policy should be an obligation instead of a consideration to safeguard millions of users. Furthermore, we argue that the inclusion of practical developer guidelines for embedding web engines would greatly benefit the overall security. This could prevent the misconfigurations of important security policies and the unintentional inheritance of potentially dangerous web engine functionalities. Moreover, the specification allows for several questionable capabilities, such as JavaScript execution and local and remote file access. Based on our real-world analysis, we argue that prohibiting these capabilities would have a minimal usability impact, since adoption is rare and all Epubs analyzed in our real-world study would remain functional. Fortunately, we did not find any indication of abuse in the wild as of yet. However, we demonstrated that this is very much possible even through legal channels. Then lastly, we have open sourced the semi-automated evaluation testbed. This way we hope to assist developers in developing secure reading systems, but also to provide a level of transparency to end users. We intend to maintain this project and welcome any new contributions. With this, I conclude my presentation and I thank you for your interest in our research.